Recall from an earlier lesson that categorical data are words or categories describing a characteristic of the individual, such as hair color, gender, type of shoe, and things like that. There are several different graphs that are used for categorical data. Especially important to us are the bar charts and pie charts. Now, those two especially are very common ways of displaying categorical data, and spreadsheet programs like Excel can, excel at making both of them. But before we create them, the first thing you need to do is create or make a frequency table or relative frequency table. This is just basically a list of the categories and how often each category occurs. So for example, suppose you did a survey and asked for the type of car that each student drives at a college. And here's some data here. Now, if you look at it, this is just a list of data. It's very hard to make anything out. I see a bunch of Chevys, some Fords, but just looking at it, not really easy to tell. What I really want to do is count how many Fords there are in this list, how many Chevys there are, how many Hondas, and so forth, and organize it that way. So you make that list, you just basically count, you get a list like this. And now this is a lot easier to see. Just looking at this, I can tell that overall Chevy and Toyota occurred more often than anything else. Those both had 12 listings. Nissan's next. I know if I add them up, the total comes out to be 50. So overall, there were 50 responses in that list. However, one thing you could do, not absolutely essential, but one thing you could do is just go back here. All these ones can be combined to like an other category. I mean, we don't really need to list all of them, and sometimes it can get kind of cumbersome if we have too many categories. So one thing you could do is just list other being all the ones that just occurred once. Now, if you look at the bottom here, this total, this is the sample size, or the total frequencies of all those observations. Now, since raw numbers are not as useful to tell other people, it is sometimes better to create a third column that's called the relative frequency. And that's essentially your frequencies divided by the total. And that can be either a percent, a decimal, or a fraction. In this case, if I go 12 divided by 50, 12 divided by 50, 10 divided by 50, 6 divided by 50, and then 5 divided by 50, 5 divided by 50, I get these percents. So as an example, if I look at Ford here, occurred 5 times. 5 divided by 50 is 0.1, or 10%. You can take your pick. If you want to write it as a fraction, 5 out of 50 is perfectly fine. 0.1 as a decimal is perfectly fine. 10% is also fine. And again, if you add up those relative frequencies, you'll notice it should always add up to 100%. Give or take rounding errors. Sometimes it may end up being like 99.9% or 100.1%, but not counting rounding errors, we'll end up with 100%. All right, so for example, suppose again we had 50 part-time students and they were asked how many courses they were taking this term. And here's a partial list. So one thing we can do if we want to fill out this table, we know there's overall 30 or overall 50. So if I take the frequency of 30 divided by 50, I know it comes out to be 0.6 or 60%. On the next line down, I know the relative frequency is 30%, 0.3. So 30% of 50 is 15. That would tell me my frequency there is 15. As for the bottom column, you can get them by subtracting. There are overall 50 students, so 50 minus the 30 and the 15 leaves you 5. As for the relative frequency, well, 5 out of 50 is 10%. You can also have done the 100% minus the 60% of the first group minus the 30% of the second group. Now, suppose I went further. How many of the students take exactly 3 courses? Well, if you get a question like that, what they're asking for is the frequency. In this case, 5. And if they ask for a proportion, then they're asking for the fraction, which would be 10% or 0.1. Okay. One more example. Now here's grades for 20 students in a math class. And again, make a frequency table and compute the relative frequencies for each category. So first thing we notice, if you want to make a table, is what are my categories? And look at this, I see there's A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. So my table should start off like this, where my grade, these are the different categories, A, B, C, D, F. And then the next line over would be the frequencies. So there are 2 A's here, 5 B's, 8 C's, 3 D's, 2 F's. That's going to be the frequencies. And if I take each of those and divide by 20, I will get the relative frequencies. So 2 divided by 20 is 0.1, 5 divided by 20 is 0.25, 8 divided by 20 is 40, or 40%, 3 divided by 20 is 0.15, or 15%, and then again, 2 out of 20 is 10%.